So hello and welcome to another episode of Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. My name is Elisa Gwilliam, and today I have the pleasure to be talking to Executive Director of Mental Health America Dutchess, Andrew O'Grady, and Professor of Psychology, Director of the Center of Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary College, and co-founder of the National Organization of Adult Addiction and Recovery, Dr. Larry Force. Our special guest today is author, speaker, and consultant Mark Bryan. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Alicia. Thank you. I'm just happy to welcome everybody to this, what is it, our seventh, call it an episode, seventh podcast. And I think we're really bringing attention to an issue that needs attention, which is addiction and recovery in the adult population, and especially at this day and age with COVID, and people are kind of dealing with the whole cyber world. So today's pretty exciting. We have a great author with us, and Larry Force is going to introduce him. And Larry and I have gone back, well, truth be told, he was a college professor of mine at Mount St. Mary College a long time ago. Now I'm old, see my gray hairs here, so. So now, actually, I look a little like him. See, I caught up to you, Larry. You got grays, I got grays, and now we're colleagues. And it's really nice to be working closely with him. He's got some great ideas. I had a conversation with him this morning about the possibility of having a front storefront after I purchase a building in the next month or so, and what we can do with it. And some of his ideas were really outside the box, but potentially amazing for the community. So I'm glad to have this partnership, Larry, and I want to turn it over to you so you can introduce your friend, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. And right back at you. I feel the exact same way about, what started off in one role of a relationship has turned into, friend and colleague. And, you need to know how proud the college is of what you've been able to unfold in your professional and personal career. I mean, you're really a community leader, and I'm not just saying that because you're on here. You really stand out in the world of mental health and wellness. So, Alyssa, thank you so much for moderating this. And as you indicated, Mark Bryan is here. That is a real coup for us. How do I know Mark Bryan? I know Mark Bryan through my friend David Brinkerhoff. And we brought Mark out to the East Coast. He lives out in California. About 3 or 4 years ago to do a presentation at the college. But I knew him before I ever met him. And how I knew him is because of the fact that he and Julia Cameron co-authored The Artist's Way. Sold millions and millions of books. And truth be told, Mark, I take that program, I implement that program in my personal life once a year, usually in the summertime, beginning with morning pages. Truth be told, my morning pages have now moved from yellow manila paper to technology to writing on an iPad. But I recommended the book today to a client that I have in my private practice, because it really is a wonderful opportunity to reflect, create, and develop this vision. When Alyssa was talking and Andrew about author and consultant and coach, when I think about your work, I think about what's really part of your bio: creative recovery, innovation across, art, science, engineering. You are truly a Renaissance man, whether it be the reference to the work and the graduate degree you did at Harvard, to the work that you did on the HIV pandemic in Africa. I mean, now we talked leading up to our discussion, about your latest work and what you're writing. It truly is an honor for me to be able to say, I know Mark. And as I was telling Dave and Jim Ball today, you're so gracious. When we called you and said, could you do this? Your answer was, what time? So we're really glad that you're here. As Andrew referenced, we wanted to develop a national voice, and I think we've been very successful at it, in the area of aging and addictions, especially because of the fact that technology has arrived. Not only has technology arrived, but we're delivering services now and presence underneath the COVID quarantine. So that's what I really would like to begin the discussion with. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about yourself, how you arrived here, but your view about the use of technology, creativity, how we go about developing. As we were leading up to this discussion, we were talking about the increase in addictions and hotlines and the increase in abuse, both elder and child abuse underneath these conditions. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. But on behalf of the three of us, thank you so much for being with us. So Mark?
Thank you, Larry. I'm privileged to be among you. I looked at all the work you're doing at the Hudson Valley Healing Center and at the Mental Health of America, Andrew and Elisa, and of course, Larry, I've known of your work for a while and been a fan. I'm in your army, as I like to say. And I was doing my morning pages this morning, just trying to get over the anxiety of being interviewed again. And it is a tough time right now. And just so you know, Julie and I first started the work that became the Artist's Way in Chicago in the late 80s. And it was because we knew a lot of people who were in recovery that were really struggling with continuing with their creative careers once they got sober or clean from drugs, whatever it was. And we thought, wow, maybe there's some way we can support that. So we started, holding workshops and basically asking people what worked for them. And as I was talking to Elisa earlier, reunion workshops, 90 days, 6 months, a year, 2 years out, to get the feedback about what was working from our workshop participants and what wasn't. And that's what really led to the whole body of work, from my books on relationships, Prodigal Father, and Reuniting Fathers and Their Kids, and Codes of Love. But nobody would take Artist's Way at first. We had to hand bind the first 1,000 copies, It's one of those start small and it builds, from 12 people in a living room to 3 or 4 million copies of the book sold. Mm-hmm. That's a privilege to get to do that. And that's because of the energy and the importance of, first of all, the recovery movement in general, but also because of the focus on innovation and creativity that has spilled over, at least in my world, from the arts at first. First, we were teaching mostly actors and wannabe actors and voice talent and dancers and graphic designers and, fine artists. And over time, more and more engineers and scientists began to reach out to me and say, I've got this idea. And so I began to help some of those projects go forward. And over the years, I've sort of developed a three-prong model. I call it, it's a Delta model, basically, where there's three creativities. There's the creativity of self, which is what you're doing with any therapy, any kind of self-reflection, any kind of, I want to be bigger, stronger, smarter next year than I am this year. That has its own challenges. Then there's the creativity of artifact, which is what we normally think of as creativity or innovation. That's the thing we're going to create. So I change by writing the first screenplay I've ever written. I wrote one 6 months into what became Artist's Way work, and I cried my eyes out. It never sold, but because I had always wanted to write one and never did and couldn't. And when it finally happened and I got it all the way across the bridge, it was very emotional for me. So there's an intersection, if you will, of creativity of self. I had to change. I had to look at myself and stop making excuses, whatever. And also that I had an artifact from that. And though it remained unsold, it was still important because I don't think creativity is wasted. It led to my next, screenplay, etc. And the other thing that I think all three of you are doing so beautifully is that community is a very creative, ongoing process. And so when you create a community the way you're doing, it has ripple effects to thousands and thousands of people. I mean, every recovering addict is touching 100 lives to help them out. And any creative person who has been struggling, once you can help them sort all that out and put them in what we used to call a tribe, we want to immerse ourselves with a tribe. So what you're doing in providing that space and the support, both for the homeless and the vets the work you're doing, Vets to Vet, and all of that, Andrew, and your healing center up there in Hudson Valley, Elisa, and certainly your work on aging and the New York Aging Conference and the things you do at Marymount, Larry, have always impressed me. And I think technology is only supporting that at this point. Like we can talk today, even though COVID is rampant and it's unsafe. California is particularly unsafe, as you might have seen with New York City and everywhere else in the world. So
It gets better. It gets
those
better.
are the three creativities. And I think you're touching on all of them in the work that you three are doing. So I'm privileged to be here and talk about it. So that's how I got started, if you will.
And, Andrew is a big proponent of this idea of breaking down silos. So, Alyssa, could you bring up that picture for a second? Because in all the video casts that we do, we reference this. And then I'm going to ask Andrew to really talk from his perspective and building upon, the discussion. But if Alyssa has that picture, she can do a screen share, I think.
Can you unpack that for me? That phrase that you were just using about
Silos.
silos. You mean
Yeah.
silos within the mental health community, or within
I can do that.
modalities? Or?
I can do that. I think we see it in a lot of different arenas, but in the mental health arena, for instance, in my career that I've been working in, they have the O offices up in Albany, the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse, the Office of Mental Health, the Office of Disabilities, and they each have licenses, and they give licenses to programs in New York State. And unfortunately, those programs have historically not communicated with each other. And there's silos. They live in a silo, even though the clients are the same and they could do so much more together. We just can't seem to get out of our way. This is our little group, and we do that. You can break down those silos throughout all of treatment. You see it with the adult mental health population. Do we engage the family as much as we should? No, we don't. We're poor at that. We don't reach out. The first thing we should be doing, in my opinion, is when you meet with a new client with mental health issues, when you're going over the treatment plan or the care plan, there's a section for family support, and we gloss over it. We write down, oh, Dad's very helpful. But does the therapist or case manager pick up the phone and say, Dad, I'm working with your son. Your son signed a consent. I just want to get you involved in this. Let's meet together. It doesn't happen. There's another silo called NAMI, a National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they do a great parent-to-parent class. So they get all the parents of people with children who have mental health issues, who are struggling to understand the issues and understand how to communicate with their family member better. And it's a wonderful process, and they learn so much. But why couldn't that be done in coordination with the care manager or the therapist? I mean, we all work in these little silos, and unfortunately for the clients we work with, that means they're doing a treatment plan for this, the treatment plan for this, a treatment plan for this. They're probably sick of doing treatment plans, and they get sick of being in treatment, and they just don't want to be part of it anymore. So then they give up, or they don't comply, is what we call it, because they're not complying with their medication, and now they're decompensating. All these, we really need to look at this whole thing differently, and that's why this whole project in intersections and looking at a different way to treat people is so vital and so important, because we're still learning how to do it. It's in an infancy in this country, the treatment of mental health and addiction, and by no means are we great at it. In fact, I don't think we're very good at it. I hate to say it. I mean, this is my career, but I think we have a lot better we can do, and that's why I embrace this with Larry, and that's what I meant by silos. And now Larry can comment on this picture.
Yeah, this picture, Mark, is the main building of Hudson River Psychiatric Center in Dutchess County. And in June, I was driving down Route 9 South, and it caught my eye, and I turned around, stopped, and took this picture, and then we tagged it. Mental health at its best, the tearing down of walls. At some point, this was the epicenter of how mental health services were delivered in isolated institutional settings, usually about 90 miles from an urban center when these things were built. And each of those doors, has a story behind it, a life. And here we are in 2020, now tearing that building down. And tearing that building down is very symbolic and based upon our message about tearing down the silos. You know, Andrew mentioned NAMI, wonderful organization. Okay, but there's time moves on. And I've had direct discussions with some of the leadership team from NAMI about the idea of how about changing the name? Because it's the National Association of Mental Illness. When in fact now I think we've embraced as a field about the idea of mental wellness or mental health, and to be able to not look at this as a stigmatizing, isolating illness. And that's what we know. I mean, you know, the area of addictions, you know, Andrew's very clear about this, about the, no pun intended, but the intersection between mental health and addiction and recovery. And I think that, you know, our role and our goal here is to elevate these thoughts to a national dialogue that will influence policy and program development and practitioners. The Intersections videocast that we're now engaged in is referred to as Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. And what it's built upon a program that we have called Intersections, a day program without walls, which is tied into a practice orientation, which is grounded in a theory. And the idea of a program without walls. I mean, today, modern technology, I talked to a CEO, and I've referenced this before, of a medical center about 5 years ago. And I said, what's the hospital of the future look like? And he said, it's all going to be built within the community. And think about, think about the role of mobile technology and how we're monitoring ourselves and monitoring others through the use of mobile technology. So that's really what we're looking to do, is to, no pun intended, but to disrupt this space. Because we know that I have a friend, Roger Monti, who was a director of a large state facility. And he's been carrying this around for about 20 years. And finally, he was able to get it down on paper through discussion that he and I had. I said, you got to get it out, even if it's an essay. Because what he talks about is how these institutions, institutionalization, community integration evolved. But unfortunately, in some cases, the rigor and structure and bureaucracy of an institution was then further implanted in the community and grown. An example would be when I worked for the state, there would be one agency that had a well-heeled budget and maybe another agency didn't. But that agency with the well-heeled budget would have staff members drive by the non-well-heeled budget agency, knowing that they needed staff, but they weren't in a position to merge the staff or share staff, which because of the fact that these little fiefdoms have been built in the community. So that's really what we're hoping to do here, is to elevate the discussion to a national level about, hey, let's reframe this. When I first talked to Alyssa and Andrew about, developing this voice, I said, one of the things that I truly believe in is whoever gets to the problem first shapes it. And I think that it's time, especially with the use of technology, especially under this COVID, arena, that we develop a presence. So that's how we arrived here. And that's how, we've asked you now to join this discussion. So we'd like to hear your comments on it.
First of all, I want to make a comment on the architecture, because I also have a project in artificial intelligence, and I had no idea that a lot of the artificial intelligence leaders think of the brain as a mirror of our physical world. And so when you look at the way that architecture was structured, where people are by themselves in cells, same thing with prisons in America, totally retro and ridiculous in the ways that we're housing human beings. And so the idea that you're using this as a change in the language, that building would now be a very open space. It may have private areas, but there'd be communal areas in any new building we were trying to build to care for people. I'm sure you experienced that, Andrew, in what you're doing. And it's also the change of language from the problem to the solution. For instance, 30 years ago, Julie and I wrote a book called The Money Drunk. And I thought, oh my God, I was so excited because, we were looking at financial situations as through the lens of addictions recovery, right? Substance abuse recovery. So if money and spending is anxiety relieving, can it become addictive? And yes, it can, as many people know. I mean, I worked with somebody who used to black out while they were shopping and had a whole warehouse in Chicago of stuff that she didn't even know she owned. And but the language wasn't proper. I used the old problem language, not the solution language. It should have been called money sober, which it is now. And because that implies a solution. And when I had my 15 minutes of fame, I was doing television a lot, and Oprah and whatever. I would be asked on these shows like Maury Povich or wherever, and they always wanted to see the battle. They wanted to see the problem. They weren't interested in the solution because it's not as dramatic, first of all. And I think this change into a much more holistic, more family-centered, more systems-oriented approach is admirable. And I remember your dimensionality ideas and the changes of the way people respond to various interventions at different times in their life course. Like I'm part of a men's group here in Los Angeles, and several of them were very successful people who got sober at 70 or 75, and now they've had 10 years of sobriety, and their lives have been better than they ever were, even though the money situation hasn't changed. But that creativity of self, they were willing to look at themselves and see something and change. And often that takes a catalyst, like your healing center, Elisa, an experience of a workshop at a healing center like that, or the opportunity to go and talk to a therapist or social worker, Andrew and Larry, that you provide. So I think that's critically important, that we think of the solution as the goal, and speak that way, and build buildings that way, and change the way we think of isolating the mentally ill in the ways that we did in the past.
Terrible language.
Not Bedlam anymore, and technology can help us do that for sure.
Language is so important. We use terrible language in this field. We always focus on the negative, and you're right. It's interesting. Everybody wants to hear about the problem because it's like gossip, and they want to hear the story, and it's interesting. And the idea that somebody got clean and sober and now lives a happy life isn't as exciting as the time they derailed a train and this whatever.
Exactly. Right.
But we use some bad language. We use non-compliance a lot. We use even institutionalization and just bad language. And we wonder why people are afraid to reach out and get treatment, because they don't want to be labeled within all this bad language. So, right. That's why we're trying.
I've been in psychotherapy. I've been on medications for depression and anxiety and ADD and all kinds of things. And I was reluctant to do any of that.
Of course.
Right? And sometimes a crisis is good, because I just heard a term recently I'd never heard before called post-traumatic growth, as opposed to post-traumatic, stress syndrome or whatever disorder. And I liked it, post-traumatic growth, because people don't necessarily seek help unless there's a crisis, right?
Right.
I didn't walk into a therapist's office because my life was going so well, right?
And it took you a long time to get there too. You probably unnecessarily suffered.
God, I got there.
Yeah, but I mean, think about that. I mean, I love that term that you just introduced, post-traumatic growth. One of the things that I try to get across to clients is, look, everything passes. I mean, look, when I was early in my training, it was behavioral, it was psychoanalytic, it was, diagnosis driven. And then somebody opened up, I'll tell you who it was. I can almost tell you what I was wearing, because I know where I was at a conference. This presenter, who's now become a friend, his name is Joel Simon. He opened up a window, and the window brought in all this fresh air. And what he introduced me to was Solution Focused Brief Therapy Association.
Okay.
And they are they are advocates for not to be, categorized or classified by diagnosis. And what they talk about is, look, if there's not a problem, don't try to fix it. What they talk about is this miracle moment. Tonight you go to sleep and the miracle happens. And tomorrow you wake up and you're living life just the way you want to live. What's it look like and how are you acting? And what that little statement does is it implants in the person's head hope and future. Just like this idea of taking out one word, and exchanging it, post-traumatic growth. Because I really think that that's really when there was a theorist I was introduced to years ago, a fellow named Eugene Gendlin, and he talked about the frozen hole in therapy, WHOLE. And what he meant by that is when you're in a therapeutic relationship and it's completely silent. That's when he feels as though that growth really happens and change. Not this chatter, not this exchange, but silence, because the person is reprocessing it. And I love, and what you bring to the table for me is that same fresh air, because you're talking about it. I'm not against psychiatry, but I refer more people to gymnasiums and to the healing center than I do to psychiatry. Because my personal belief, and I share it with many of my colleagues, if you feel better about yourself, you feel better about the things around you, and everything passes.
And nothing is better immediately than exercise. Changes the endorphins, changes all of that.
In a second. I was talking about walking to a friend of mine, Jeff Kahana, and he started referencing Hippocrates and talking about how Hippocrates, from the historical perspective, walked his way through depression, and that walking, just the simple act of walking just changes everything, and it doesn't take months and months and months and months. It can happen if you want it to. It can happen immediately.
I'm going to jump in here because I think there's a myth about therapy that's out there that sort of in a way contributes to the stigma, and that is it's pretty well known that we're going to be reviewing our past. I'm going to go into my therapist's office and I'm going to tell them the errors I've made and what I would like to have differently. And part of that early therapeutic intervention will be my discussing, the family constellation, where I'm from, what kind of dynamics were at play in my family of origin, right? I'm more of a family systems guy now, looking back generations to see those patterns, and that's what Codes of Love was about. But the fact is, we're not just doing that. Yes, I needed to go back and reevaluate, my family and different, and actually become aware of some of the patterns that were instilled for me in a dysfunctional situation that my family occasionally found itself in. But beyond that, and this is what you're talking about with the solution, beyond that is the love and the loyalty and the survival. That's what Codes of Love was about. It's why don't we have a focus going in on, this is the goal. The goal is I am going to love my family again. I am going to understand them in a different context. I never thought of, because I framed my memories of my family were actually instituted in the mind of a 10-year-old boy who really didn't understand at that age what was going on around him enough that that it wouldn't affect him later. But he didn't see the bigger picture, like one fight in an emotionally weighted situation, right? Where we're at dinner and the family is arguing and things are thrown and whatever. And that weights much differently than the 150 days where we had a great dinner and we were loving and laughing and enjoying each other's company. So reframing that, as you mentioned, for me, changed the way I thought about myself. So that the subtitle of Codes of Love is rethink your family and remake your life, because I don't think of my family as dysfunctional or as wounded or damaged as I did, because I see them in a different perspective now. I've balanced out those very dramatic times, which were crazy and were abusive and negative, right? With a lot of the really strong times and the really laughing and, playing football and with my dad and stuff like that. And so I think I would be less afraid to go into therapy if I understood that I was headed to someplace that was going to be really positive for me and positive in my, change my perspective on who my family was, because I actually think you can change your past. I can change my past because the past I understand as my past is framed in a child's mind. And so I really don't know the past in a more systematic way, in a more holistic, as you say, holistic and positive way. So I never thought of my parents, who fought a lot when I was a kid, as sorry if I'm rambling, but I never thought of them as loving. I would never have imagined that my father wrote hundreds of romance letters, really as a Navy guy, right? Overseas to his college sweetheart. And, I never understood that part of their relationship. And once I did, it was much different. I've been working with a guy at UCLA who's, he has the, what's the Tannenbaum chair in the physical neurology of creativity, or whatever the hell it is. Bob Bilder's his name. And he's been doing some research on, he's a neuroscientist, right? And he says that the brain, once it changes, we really can't go back to the way it was, in the sense that we're not going to go back to that old neural wiring. And I think that's what you're really helping people do in all the ways that you're affecting them, Larry. And, your workshops, Elisa, your focus on community health and vets. I really appreciate that very much, because I was raised as a Navy brat, and there was very little for families 50 years ago, and families are very much impacted by overseas deployments and the stress of somebody in a combat zone that's a family member. It has its ripples throughout the family, and I doubly appreciate what you're doing there, Andrew. It's incredibly important, and they earned it.
Yeah.
They earned support more than they get. So as vets, so
That program.
one positive architecture.
Anyway. As you're talking, I'm starting to think about the important role that you have created. I mean, your thinking is so refreshing. Your writing is so powerful, and you've influenced the thought patterns of so many millions of people, myself included.
Thanks.
So you need to hear that, from the heart, about what an icon you are in this world of recovery, addictions, mental wellness, and to say that we're grateful to have you today doesn't really capture it. So Andrew, any summary comments from anybody? Andrew, Mark?
I just want to say that, Mark, your comment about, being able to see, you didn't use the word through a different lens, but, and that's what therapy potentially is, if it's done right, is that you look at your history and you look at your past in a different lens. And all of a sudden you see that, it wasn't as horrible as it's interesting how you said you could have 150 days of joyous happiness. And then it's kind of like what you said about before. Everybody wants to focus on the problem because it's more exciting.
Right, exactly.
It's more traumatic too.
It is.
People remember that, and to look at it at a different lens and realize that, it wasn't as bad, or it didn't have to be ripple effect throughout your whole life, and grab onto some of that goodness that you had. That's phenomenal. I love it.
Because there's something that kept my hillbilly family alive for three generations, 300 years in Virginia Hills or wherever. And so we have to find that too, whatever kept them alive, and, work to get them there.
That's very true.
I'll tell you one quick story about this idea that we really don't know our parents. I was, I used to reunite families on the Oprah show. And so one of the families, it's just a quick story. The the daughter was totally alienated from her mom because she thought she pushed her so hard to go to prom, and she didn't want to go to prom. And her mom made such a big deal out of getting her to prom and forced her. And so her memory was being forced into prom, right? And not wanting to go, and not wanting to have to do get a big fancy dress and all that. But when we really looked at the pattern multi-generationally, her mother's mother had saved up for 2 years to buy her daughter a gown so that she could attend prom. So once she understood that, what it meant for her mother, what prom meant for her mother, unpacked that enough that we see beyond what our assumptions are, that changed everything for her. And I was very moved by that. Just that simple story of, she didn't realize what it meant to her mother, and she never thought to ask either, because we really don't think to ask that much. I didn't for a long time. So.
Yeah. Well, I hope people think to ask questions about this and really, there's a lot of questions you could ask about this, and Lisa will tell us at the end how people can reach out and get some questions to us, and we'll be happy to forward them to you or we can answer.
Yeah.
Sure. MarkBryan.com. It's easy. MarkBryan.com. Now I sound like I'm telling myself. It's so like not that person, but what you're doing is authentic, and it is changing the world. Not even one person at a time, in a networked fashion. And I'm aligned with your mission. I would like to see you reaching millions of people.
Yeah.
And however I can help you do that. Filling all those rooms that you have for therapy and all of that, Lisa, I'm happy to do that. So, and I was very skeptical about energy healing stuff early on. And I was offered a free session at the Open Center by a woman who was Adele, who was at the time the executive director. She's since passed away. Great woman. And she said, "Yeah, Mark, we're going to give you this free energy healing." And I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm not into that. And so she said, "No, just go do it. You just got to lay on the table." So I laid on the table, and somebody just, took their hands over me. Didn't even touch my body, didn't say a thing. And I was crying like a baby within 5 minutes. You know what I mean? So I've had my skepticism. My mind had to be opened in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
It still likely will. It's not a project like creativity or any of the arts. It's an inexhaustible experience. I'll never become a perfect writer or a perfect dancer or a perfect parent or whatever it is that I'm being creative, whatever mode I'm being creative in. So and that's one of the beauties of it. I hope to be healthier next year than this. So save me a seat.
Can I give you one word? Outstanding.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Your message was so powerful, so clear, and outstanding. So thank you. Alyssa?
Yeah, and we're hoping you feel to be creative during your time of recovery, or whether you're a family member dealing with somebody in recovery.
I am.
Thank you, Mark, so much for being with us today. Your work has inspired millions to reach for something beyond what they thought they were originally capable of. And thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. And if you want to hear this again, share it with friends, or even leave a comment, you can do so by logging on to our Digital Resource Center on our website, www.intersections-exchange.org. And you can join us next week at the same time for more on Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange.
And thank all those therapists.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, guys.